Hello, and welcome to Keep the Channel Open, a podcast featuring conversations about art, literature, and creativity. My name is Mike Sakasagawa, and this is episode 133. Today's guest is André Ramos-Woodard. Hey there, everyone. Welcome to the show. Today on the show, I'm talking with photographer André Ramos-Woodard. Raised in the southern states of Tennessee and Texas, André Ramos-Woodard is a contemporary artist who uses their work to emphasize the experiences of the underrepresented, celebrating the experience of marginalized peoples while accenting the repercussions of contemporary and historical discrimination. Working in a variety of media, including photography, text, and illustration, Ramos-Woodard creates collages that convey ideas of communal and personal identity, influenced by their direct experience with life as a queer African American. Focusing on Black liberation, queer justice, and the reality of mental health, Ramos-Woodard works to amplify repressed voices and bring power to the people. I saw Andre's work at the Portfolio Walk at the Medium Festival this year. The work they were showing was primarily from their BLACK SNAFU series, and it is the sort of thing that tends to make you stop in your tracks, at least if you're anything like me. As you'll hear in our conversation, the underlying photographs that form the foundation of each image are images celebrating Blackness. But then on these photographs, André has drawn on these racist caricatures of Black people that are taken from old cartoons, notably Don Ray's Scrub Me Mama with a Boogie Beat. The interplay between the photograph and illustration creates a dialogue with an inherent tension, a dialogue that I think the viewer is invited to participate in. A couple of notes before we get started. If you are or will be in the Reykjavik area, André will have work in a show at Kanski at the end of this month. That'll be from October 22nd to the 30th, 2022. And keep an eye out for an exhibition at the Houston Center for Photography at the end of the year. Finally, I also just wanted to give a little content note that in our conversation, André and I talk about racism and white supremacy, nothing graphic, but obviously that can be a sensitive or triggering topic, so just something to be aware of. All right, let's get started. Here's my conversation with André Ramos-Woodard. So I've been thinking a lot about your work since I saw it at Medium. I was really taken by it at that time, which I think, I mentioned it at the time. So I went through and I was reading, your artist statement and stuff. And where I wanted to start was with the BLACK SNAFU series.
Okay.
And in particular, a couple of things that I noticed in the artist statement. So these images, you talk about appropriating various depictions of Black people that come from the history of American cartooning. Mm-hmm. You're sort of superimposing these drawings over photographs. And so the first thing that I wanted to talk about was that verb you used, appropriating. Mm-hmm. Because I think it's a powerful thing, but I think it's also something that's very misunderstood. Even within the photo community, the question of appropriation is it can be very sort of inflammatory or controversial.
Yeah, absolutely.
So can we start with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess I'll open up by talking specifically about that work and kind of where I started with it. I started BLACK SNAFU when I was in graduate school at the University of New Mexico as my thesis project. And I was thinking very critically at the time. This was like beginning of 2020. This actually was in the works before the uprising of social justice. But I was thinking very critically about just genuinely what I like to do with my work. I like to talk about identity. I'm happy to be Black, so I like talking about Black people. And in the midst of grad school, I really started to think critically, I guess is the word, about how much I just like to draw and how much drawing has inspired my entire artistic practice. And so I combined them. I wanted to look at drawing, but I wanted to look at it specifically from a lens that was akin to my identity. I like an African American lens. And it was real quick when I found racist imagery. And it's unfortunately not surprising, but it still is appalling. Just because it's not surprising doesn't make it any easier to look at for me. And so recognizing that these images of Black people from the 40s and 50s and beyond, honestly, but before that, the 20s and 30s, were made by white people to depict Black people as other and as negative and as funny, that was just nasty. It was just disgusting. But I couldn't, but there also is all of these like illustrative and attractive qualities of these illustrations because they are cartoons. They are akin to the same things that I grew up with and loved just because the illustrations were funny and kooky and colorful. And so thinking about that, I wanted to reappropriate them because first, to me, appropriation means pulling from something, right? I'm taking something and kind of using it for my own or claiming it as my own. But let's get it straight that this did not come from me, right? Like this is not my creation. And that's why I think the term reappropriating is so important to me because especially in this context, because I, as a Black person, get to write the narrative in my own story by taking things that were meant to be anti-Black. So it's really important to me to reappropriate because, honey, let's recognize that these things are tied to racism and white supremacy. But that being said, like I, as a Black person, am going to call attention to that and reclaim them for my own usage. So I don't know, appropriation is so important to me. Also, like, as most artists know and most artists talk about, at least I feel like I've been told so many times that so many things have been done before. When you stumble upon what you're going to do next in your artistic career or your artistic path, like, well, honey, don't think too much about it because if you're trying to make something that's so new and so innovative, well, I'm sure you can find something within the textbooks or within the art galleries in the United States somewhere that is in dialogue with what you are making and thinking. So I don't know. It's just important for me to call attention to all those things. Like I'm not an originator of these things, but I am proudly Black and I will use them for my advantage. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah. For me, I just think that a lot of times the conversation in Photoland about appropriation tends to be more along the lines of like stealing, like the really famous one, which of course, like in the context of race is like heavily loaded, right? Mm-hmm. But like the big conversation that I remember happening, and this was probably like 15 years ago, was when Richard Prince was doing those like Instagram appropriations, but which is like a whole other thing. But to me, when we're talking about appropriation, I think it's like really necessary to look at the power dynamics that are involved. And so for somebody like Richard Prince, who is a very successful, affluent white artist, taking people's Instagram pictures and then calling them art because he put a frame around them that's one thing. But like, as opposed to someone who is from a marginalized community taking something that like you said, you didn't originate, but now you're using it for a different purpose. Like the power dynamics involved in that are very, very different, to me at least, right?
Definitely. Yeah, I completely agree. I think that they are very different. And it's always an interesting thing because what sticks out to me, and my photography teachers are going to slap me on the wrist for this because I don't remember their name, but there was, I think it was a woman in the 80s, 70s. And what she was doing was like taking pictures of famous pictures and putting them in a museum context, right? And putting her name on them with a new date. She was taking like pictures of Dorothy Lang images and I think Robert Frank images, something, very renowned in the photo world images. But she was like, well, I'm the one that did this with my camera. So this is mine now. And it was all about what is reappropriation. I just like the fact that people can use the technology to make people think about redefining things. Mm-hmm. And even if it is kind of like, it can be seen as malicious or, a hoax in some ways, they're still making people think about what is valid in art and what it means. And so, I don't know, I find so much importance in appropriating. Just blatantly because like what I said, like things are always going to be there's a precedent for everything. So inevitably we're going to be reappropriating ideas and visual aesthetics regardless. But when it comes to marginalized communities taking back things, that is such a necessary thing. I think about the artist William Camargo. Do you know William Camargo?
Oh, yeah. The thing with the John Davola thing?
Yeah. And, literally recontextualizing this act within the photograph because it's related to identity. It's related to his experience. It's no longer just about the fun of photography. It's no longer about the technicality of the medium. It's about life. It's about our existence.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, when people of color recontextualize these things because they have something to say, I think it's everybody's responsibility to listen up, to be honest with you, because they're appropriating for a pertinent reason that we can all learn from. Not to say we all can't learn from the history of photography. I mean, baby, I got my major in it for a reason. I love it. But when people are saying something pertinent about their existence in response to being marginalized, in response to white supremacy, baby, we have to listen up. Because if we don't listen up, then how are we going to move forward? Sorry, I'm going on these tangents, but I don't know. Reappropriation for people of color just means something so much more in a systematic, like, in this culture that has been ruled by white supremacy for eons. I mean, like, it just feels like it's so much more.
Yeah. I think that Camargo Devola thing was so sort of illustrative of what you're talking about, especially considering the dynamic there, because Devola's response to it was like, you're stealing from me, right?
Yeah.
Whereas, I mean, the context of the image, like the concept, of course, of running away from the camera was John Devola's idea originally. And he was using it to talk about time and photography and things like that. But like Camargo putting that into a contemporary social context of like, it means something different for a person of color to be running than it does for a white person to be. I mean, it's like a totally different thing. And it's just such an interesting thing for whether it's a black person or a Latin or indigenous person in the United States, like whether we're talking about a history where white people literally appropriated people's lands and bodies. And that's the context in which Camargo is, you know, making his statement with this image. And all that Devola was able to see, at least at the time, I don't know if he's done any learning since, is like, oh, you copied my idea and you're stealing from me. And it's just such an ironic thing, you know?
It's incredibly ironic because, like, I completely agree with everything you're saying. To be honest with you, if I come to a point in my career where a emerging, young, talented, skilled artist were to recontextualize my work and say something that was more pertinent to their existence in the time, girl, go off. I am honored. Like, are you serious? I am honored. Because that means I'm influencing the current makers. And they're pushing the narrative in ways that I couldn't. That's something to be applauded. I will give a standing ovation, you know? And I hope that Devola has come to terms with the negativity, the negative reaction that he had and understands why it was negative. Because, you know, people in these positions of power and privilege should really be honored. I feel like that these people are like, William Camargo wasn't a shot, right? It was like, oh, I'm paying homage to this work, but I'm recontextualizing because I have something else to say. If anything, it's a conversation that's positive. I don't see how it was so harmful, but you know, the tea.
Yeah. So, you know, another thing I want to talk about with these images, I want to talk a little bit about audience, because I think it's such an interesting question, right? Like, one of the things that you're talking about in the artist statement is exposing viewers to these anti-Black tropes and the sort of how these are so foundational to American pop culture and how the culture of the United States is so rooted in white supremacy, but while you're simultaneously celebrating the reality of what it means to be Black. So I feel like there's, in that statement, right, there's two things, right? Two perhaps audiences, but I don't, like, I'm wondering, like, how you imagine these things, like how audience comes into it for you, because the question for me is, like, who is the audience for this work? Who's the intended audience? Like, are you, when you talk about exposing viewers to these tropes, are you imagining that you're exposing white people to these tropes, or Black people, or other people of color? Are you imagining that it's both? And so, like, because the work is going to operate on different levels for different audiences, and I'm just like, I wonder, like, how you reckon with all of that.
Absolutely. Thank you for, that's such a good question. Thank you for asking. I think about it a few different ways. I think about it 3 different ways. So let's see if I can break it down. First and foremost, the work is for niggas. My work is for Black people. This specific work I say that because I, as a Black person, use this work to research, cope, understand my experience living as an African American in this country and what that means in various ways, what that means in celebratory ways, what that means to me and my family, all the love that we share for each other, regardless of our color, regardless, we love each other and we are undeniably Black. There's things that are related to that, like hip hop and gold. And there's things that I love about that, and I want to celebrate that to the utmost. And it is important. And I must be candid also and say that it's the most important audience to me. And it's also like the feedback that means the most to me. I haven't shown this work in a lot of spaces that are predominantly Black. And that is something that I want to do. That bothers me. I am super happy to show it where I've shown it. I've shown it in Albuquerque, New Mexico for my thesis. I've shown it at Leon Gallery in Denver, Colorado. Shout out Eric Nord. But these places are not predominantly Black. I want Black people's response to it because the things I'm saying are about us. I want Black people to reconcile with the fact that white supremacy happens and it has a hand in pop culture. We have to recognize that, all of us do, if we're going to move forward. But I also want to know Black people's responses to it because they matter the most. Some of this imagery is quite visceral. Even though it's fun and kooky and cute or whatever, it's visceral. If I am doing a disservice to Black people, for example, that would be, then girl, let's pack it up. That's the most important to me. Because while I'm telling the story, if it's something that is offensive to my own people, then that's something we have to talk about. Trigger warnings aside, like if it's a collective disagreement, then girl, I'm on board. But it's really important for me to put these works in spaces where Black people can access them for that conversation, for that feedback, but also to teach them what I'm learning through my process, through my creating. I want to teach them everything about my positive experiences of Blackness and how to hone in on that and how to love that, but also how to fight against white supremacy and reconcile with the shit. That's just hard. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about it. Yeah. So Black people, I wrote a traditional artist statement, typed up 300, 400 words or whatever. And then when I sent it out, I think for thesis, I wrote on top of it, this is really for my niggas. Because at the end of the day, the work is, Black people are going to understand the work the most because it is specifically about that experience. Mm. But that does not necessarily undermine the other communities that I think this work is important for too. Secondly, I really think this work is important for white people. White people specifically because white people have the most privilege and power in our society according to race. It is backed up by systemic history. It's backed up by government. It's backed up by law, right? So when I show these things about white supremacy to white people, it is their job to listen up. Ask questions if you need to understand. That's what the work is here for. For these conversations to be happening and for white people to do their own research and to look into it, to reconcile with the fact that their ancestors absolutely benefited from these absolutely horrific racist depictions of Black people and people of color in this small things like illustration, right? It's not, we can talk about slavery. We can talk about Jim Crow. We can talk about law. We can talk about all that stuff. But when you break it down to even my love and passion, art, yes, there's still remnants of white supremacy and racism. So the sooner we reconcile with all of that, and the sooner that we can really learn to move on, especially because I love these opportunities to talk about it, but there are some people in this country, in this society, that have the most privilege and power that are white, that are only going to listen to it when they hear it from white lips. So when a white person has the power and privilege to say, oh, by the way, I've been listening to what these Black people have been saying about their experience, and this is what they say. This is how it affects them. When they listen and they tell their people who are so racist, they'll only listen to their own people, then maybe we'll have some more of a chance, It obviously does not mean, that does not mean that's the majority, but there's a lot of people in privilege and power that only listen to their people that are like them. And we need the people in privilege and power to stand up for us, you know? What did Huey Newton say? He said, he was talking about like, yes, Black Panthers, we absolutely need solidarity and we need to push our narrative as Black people. But the sooner we get this out to the comrades, the sooner that we can collectively make an effort and move forward. We need everybody at every societal position of power to listen up and make some effort. And that's, and white people are not excluded from that. And thirdly, people of color in general, marginalized people in general, queer people in general, disabled people in general. My experience as an othered person, as a Black person that is othered in this society, is in ways relative to other experiences, regardless of whether it's about race or queerness or being able-bodied or more. You know, if you are othered by white supremacy in this country, on this planet, then there is a way into the work, because you at the very least understand and have experienced that shitty feeling of being othered, reconciling with the things that you've been seeing, that have been depicted through pop culture about marginalized communities. It's nasty. And so the work is for everybody, but, you know, I'm gonna be real. It's for niggas. It's for white people to learn, for sure. And it is really for some solidarity. I hope that helps.
Yeah, definitely. One of the things that sort of I think about when I'm thinking about audience in this way is like how the work is going to hit different audiences in different ways. And even just starting with the audience of the artist, you know, because like I think that's the work's first audience, really, is the people who are making it, right? I think about with these images, many of them, the photographic part of it can be very tender, you know, like where there is like a reverence or a love or almost a sensuality to some of the images. Like particularly, I'm thinking of like ones like Bling or Buds, right? Where there's like a human figure with like not a face showing, but like skin and it's very intimate in that way, right? And beautiful, right? But it's paired with like these really, like, I'm trying to think of the right adjective. Like the word that comes to mind is like violent, right? Violent illustration. Now I know, like, for example, you gave an artist talk to the Kansas City Art Center, I think it's called Kansas City Artist Coalition. Yeah. And one of the things you talked about was having to step away from your research and stuff while you were making this work, because seeing these images is traumatic, right? And I can certainly relate to that. And moreover, like I'm thinking, you know, you're talking about drawing being a part of your work. You're having to, like, you don't originate these images, but you do have to reinscribe them with your hand, right?
Yeah.
And that must also be a traumatizing kind of experience, I would imagine.
Absolutely.
It's one of these things where, like, if I'm imagining being a Black audience member, right? Or if I imagine myself as an Asian person, if I were seeing some of the harmful, stereotypical ways that Asian people were caricatured in pop culture for so long, right? And really, Black people and Asian people continue to be caricatured in that way, right?
Exactly.
There's going to be, like, I as an audience member seeing images like that, there's also going to be perhaps an element of, I don't want to say being traumatized by it, but like I'm going to have an immediate emotional reaction to that, right?
Definitely.
And so that's sort of like I feel like there is something complicated about that, you know, where it's like you're pairing this sort of like violent imagery with this really loving, tender imagery. And it's like, so there's this tension between the two emotional responses. You know what I mean?
Yep. I know what you mean. You know, I've had a couple people tell me that. I've had a couple people respond to what I consider negative. You know, someone saying that the work was, that they were fearful that the work was going to attract white supremacists, or that the work was, the racist depiction. Well, this is different. Someone said the racist depictions were not super racist, but anyway,
what?
Girl, the tea. But anyway, you know, I completely agree. Sometimes it's really fucking hard to do this shit. And I've stepped back from it because, you know, doing this research and pulling these pulling these images or these illustrations from this archive and being like, wow, this is fucked up. People need to know about this because it's fucked up. And people have just been like, Warner Brothers and Disney have just completely, not completely, right, but for the most part, hidden what these illustrations and their ties and relativeness to illustration today, and how harmful they were in the past, and how that has played a precedent. That has been erased. I'm gonna call them out on that. That being said, yeah, it sucks to just reconcile with the fact that someone was a fucking racist and was like, you know what, I'm gonna make these people look silly. I'm like, and just draw something ridiculous like these things. You know, we talk about Warner Brothers and the racist pictures that I'm using. We can talk about Dr. Seuss, you know, like there's a lot of things that are fucked up. But that being said, you know, I also understand and know that as a person of color, as a Black person, there's so much to love about myself. There's so much to love about my Blackness. And if I can't even see it in myself when I'm feeling down, I can definitely see it in my mama. And I can definitely see it in my sister, my brothers, and my daddy. I can definitely see it in Black people that are walking around on the streets. I can definitely see it in pop culture. I can definitely see it in rappers. I can see it in so many ways, right? But that doesn't mean that I can ignore racism. Honey, if I could ignore racism, girl, I would have done it a long time ago. We cannot pretend like it doesn't happen. And that's why I think it's important to me to combine these things, because while I am authentically and positively Black, society continuously find ways to make me other. And that is not fair. That is not fair. And so while it is difficult for me to face some of these things in the work, you know, it's not fair that I have to live an other life. And because of that, I'm going to let people know that. These things are difficult to look at, but it's difficult to be a person of color living in a system that is against you every day. You know, these things are difficult to look at, but I don't know, they haven't gone away. Mm. And so that's why I feel like I need to keep making the work. They haven't gone away. I don't know. I struggle with this sometimes, to be quite honest with you. It hasn't gone away, but I'll make work. I'll make these pieces. And then I'll be like, you know what? I need a break. I need to make something else. I'll make something that is about my mental health to kind of like focus on that. Or I'll make something that is overtly positive. You know, in Black SNAFU specifically, my original intent was to make photographs that were celebratory and illustrations that were digging from these reappropriation of caricatures, of minstrels. And after like, I don't know, maybe like 7 or 8, I was like, this is fucking exhausting. This is really exhausting. I feel like I'm focusing so much on the negative, even though I was making pictures that I thought were positive. Like Buds, for example, it was a celebration of starting dreadlocks for me. I was restarting that process again. And my coarse 4C hair is perfect for locks, unlike a lot of other hair textures and types out there. So I was celebrating that as a fact. But you know, taking these minstrel characters, whether they're educational or not, was rough. And I eventually had to be like, you know what? I'm going to go into Black superheroes. I'm going to go into positive Black cartoons from my childhood, because I had to find other ways to keep, I don't know, I just had to fight against that. I had to make myself happy. I had to find some positivity in it. I don't know. I don't even know where I'm going with it. I just feel like I just feel like it's work that needs to be done for me at the very least. And I hope that if it's work that needs to be done for me, understanding Blackness and celebrating Blackness, I hope that other people can, especially Black people, can see that as well. Yeah. I hope so.
I mean, I think that there is this whole tension as an artist between feeling an urgency to talk about the aspects of our existence that are visceral, right? That feel important, right? But also at the same time, it's like a lot of the time when we're talking about the biggest emotions in our lives, those can be very negative experiences. And it's a challenge to balance this need to talk about the issues, to talk about the experiences without also sort of dwelling in that space, because it's painful to do that. It was painful the first time around, and it's painful to revisit it, to make the art, even if it feels like, for both personal and social political reasons, we need to make the work. Mm-hmm. It doesn't come without a cost. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I was making some posters after George Floyd was killed in 2020, was lynched in 2020. And, even saying things like that, I got to correct myself because I'm like, no, people need to know how bad it was. But those posters were very visceral, very visceral. It was from a body of work called African America, Contempt of Greasy Pig. And I was taking screenshots of police brutality and overlaying them with text that was like snippets, maybe like taken from news articles. For example, like Ahmaud Arbery's picture or The Happening was one of them. So there's a piece that I have. Oh my God, it's a very big file. But there's a piece that I have of Ahmaud Arbery, and the piece is called Miss Me with the Microaggressive Bullshit, because a news article came out after his death was publicly announced, which wasn't until a month later, must I say. But it says not racially motivated. When we all know what the hell, that was an absolutely racially motivated, racist lynching, and it was really important to make that stuff. It felt for me, especially then, I was so mad. I wanted to scream, but I just had to do what I did best at the time, I thought, was to make art about this experience and share it with people. That being said, it's not something that I can show a lot. It is one of the few things that I don't know how to describe it. It's not that I fear putting that work. I don't think I would ever want to put that work in a Black neighborhood. For example, it's something that I will not do. That those pieces also, for example, I will not sell a lot of them at all. I'm very particular at what pieces I will sell from that body of work. And if it is, I probably won't sell it to a white person. There's just things with that body of work because it's so visceral. But I don't know, those things just seem important to me because our lives as marginalized people and people of color specifically is fucking violent. It sucks sometimes. And if it doesn't, and it doesn't suck all the time, but we continue to be reminded through news, through learning about history, about the things that suck. And it really ain't fair that people of color have to relive those traumas just by going to a history class that doesn't contain mostly people of color. That's not fair. I think that those people have the absolute right, and it's necessary to speak about that and definitely put it in spaces, of course, where everyone can learn from it, but spaces of privilege, honey. Put it where people can see it. Yeah. Put it where white people that don't have that cannot understand that experience, able-bodied people and straight people that do not have those experiences, how can they understand more? And so that's why I think it's hard, and it has to come with moderation. People have to respect their own selves and what they can do. That's work that I feel like is necessary in a lot of ways. I mean, there's definitely times when I remember having ideas in grad school and one of my Black comrades, MK, being like, oh, if you do that idea, I don't want to be present for it. Right. And that's something I was like, okay, that is important to me to digest as an artist and as a Black person. This makes another person uncomfortable. I need to understand that and reconcile with that. These are, I don't know, it's just like a continual battle as artists, we want to say things that we feel like are important, but we never want to harm our own people. There's
a sort of like, if you're going to be making work that is very emotionally charged, right, that there's going to be a possibility of viewers being uncomfortable. And to me, there's always a sort of question of like, what is that discomfort serving, right?
Yeah.
Because I think that work like this, if you're showing it to a Black audience or a white audience, there's the potential for discomfort in both, but that discomfort is not the same. Mm-hmm. And, mm-hmm. Making a white audience uncomfortable can be very educational,
Definitely.
But like you say, I think it's a challenge for the artist because of the fact that the discomfort between different audiences is different, and you want to be careful, because we don't want to to harm our own community. And
Absolutely.
there's a real balance there that I think that anybody making work like that is like has to sort of reckon with. And there's not really an easy answer.
Mm-hmm.
I want to move to talking about this other series, the mediocre ass N-word. I'm going to say it that way. I hope that doesn't make it awkward, but I don't.
No, that doesn't. Everyone listen up. That is how you do it. Whatever I must say, people have said the N-word that are not Black too many times to quote it. And saying, quote, the N-word is the perfect way. So I actually thank you for using it that way. I appreciate it, honestly.
Well, I
must say.
Yeah. One of the things that I was thinking about, especially in sort of juxtaposing these two bodies of work, is I'm thinking about the position of the artist being like insider versus outsider, the position of the artist and the position of the audience being insider versus outsider. Because I think that in both of these series, there is a way that the images are sort of engaging with that. Mm-hmm. And so with this series, it's you've described it as being autobiographical. It's in the statement for that as well. I mean, it is plain and simple a body of work about you. Mm-hmm. And this series also has to do with racism, microaggressions, things like that do appear in this series as well. But it's perhaps less the focus of it. Like the focus is more personal.
Definitely.
And talking about your mental health and things like that. I feel like when I'm looking at this, one of the things that jumps out to me is the ways that, like all of us, even within communities that we strongly identify with, that we feel like an insider to these communities, like you with Blackness or like me with Asianness, for example, right? Mm-hmm. Also, there are ways that those communities, we feel other within that community as well.
Yes.
And in both the Asian American community and my understanding in the Black community, that this question of masculinity is such a thing, right? It can be very stifling. It can be very, and especially in terms of mental health, the ways that masculinity is enforced within these communities can be very harmful to the people within that community. So this whole thing about being an insider and an outsider at the same time feels very relevant to me. And I wanted to sort of see if that sparked anything for you.
Yeah, it definitely did. Yeah, it did. It's funny because I'm queer. Mm-hmm. If you didn't know, but I don't know. I say girl a lot, and I have kind of a feminine voice at times whenever I just want to, and sometimes I say dude, and sometimes I say man, or whatever. And I guess I've been coming to terms recently over the past few years that André is a lot of things, and André is masculine sometimes and feminine sometimes, and neither sometimes, and that's okay, because I definitely could say that in growing up in predominantly Black schools and just a Black household, I had two brothers. I'm a triplet. We all the same age, so there was these subconscious maybe, but these expectations of how I was supposed to act because of the fact that I was a dude, I guess, growing up, or, that I have a penis. It's really weird. But I also know that I was not what is stereotyped within the Black and outside of the Black community as a little Black kid. I was not. I watched the home videos of me girl, I was so gay. I was whenever I was 4 to 7 and 8, I was I was proud. I was happily gay, and I say that, I meaning I was the one pretending my my sucker was lipstick and putting purple lipstick on and being very femme and dancing very femme to these female R&B songs. And it was just me being a kid, but I can't deny that it was femme, and that's fine. That's totally fine. But somewhere in the mix of that, I guess I stopped doing that. When I was younger, I completely stopped acting femme, and I don't know why. I don't know if it was a specific event. I don't know if it was me being like, oh crap, boys don't normally act like this. Or maybe I don't know. But I definitely know that, there's been plenty of times situationally, while that, I don't know what happened with that specific instant. I can recall times when I was made fun of for liking rock music because it wasn't tough enough, or liking, I don't know, a Paramore and alternative music and wearing skinny jeans before, girl, let's also, the tea. I was wearing skinny jeans when I was a little emo kid in middle school, and then everyone thought it was cool. And it wasn't gay no more. But anyway, I definitely feel very much, at least I have felt very much at times like a black sheep. And I don't mean to say it. I don't mean to be punny, but, I felt like I was not right. Something wasn't right about me because of the way I acted didn't relate to the way that I looked. And that's very much, I think, societal and cultural. Black men are supposed to be tough and like specific things. My brothers also like basketball. I didn't like basketball. I like karate. And I didn't like taking my shirt off around other boys. I was not that kid. But I rant a lot. I don't know where I'm going. I hope that
it's good. It's
okay,
good.
Cool. How do you feel? I mean, I feel like I definitely feel like it was I can't pinpoint it, but there was a lot of societal and cultural parts of my childhood and development that made me feel like I had to act a certain way. And I've just recently started to denounce some of those things.
I think, I've talked about this before, both on and off the show, that masculinity, as we conceive of it in America, and also within the sort of flavors that masculinity has within, our sort of minority cultures, whether that be the Black community or the Asian American community or whatever. I mean, masculinity is such a trap, it's such a, it's all such bullshit, and
Absolutely.
It really keeps us from experiencing the fullness of our lives, I feel like.
Literally.
And, when I'm looking at these images, there's a sort of somberness to many of them. And I mean, there's not just that, because there's and you've talked about this before, how that there is sort of a familiarity, a familial quality that you're also working with here. And, in some ways, perhaps a nostalgic quality for your, family life and things like that. But I'm also really struck by, especially in these pictures of you with your brothers, which, that is a motif that comes up several times in this series, how there's obviously a closeness and a fondness, right?
Mm-hmm.
But also how that closeness and fondness, that love, isn't enough to always overcome the sort of difficult feelings that we can have in our own lives as individuals. And certainly depression and anxiety have been really big things in my own life as well. Mm-hmm. And that, mental health is something that in the Asian American community, I think this is changing a little bit now, especially sort of as people get more and more generations away from the sort of ancestral culture. But there's a whole meme about Asian people don't go to therapy, and yet I think a lot of us struggle with these same things, with depression and anxiety, and the ways that, we may have close families or close friend communities, are supposed to make you feel included and you belong, and that you get support in that way. And in some ways they do, but they also, it's not enough, And this is something that really, I feel this coming from these images. You know what I mean?
Well, I'm appreciative, honestly, that you feel that. I hate that you've experienced those things because they fucking suck. But
I mean, haven't we all though? Right?
I mean, most of us, I would think so. And in various ways. I mean, I remember, growing up, I was fucking sad a lot of times. And I was depressed. I did not have positive thoughts, and I was incredibly self-deprecating, tied to, now I know, ideas of perfectionism and like relating myself to other people. But I don't know. I feel like I never knew what that was. I literally thought that was normal. And maybe it is to some degree, but that being said, there's something to be said about it. I don't think it's normal if, I need more than what people are telling me, like, friends and family and love and a hug, to feel like I'm worth it. To feel like I want to go on to the next day, to be blunt. It's hard sometimes to deal with depression and anxiety at its worst. And I remember when I was making the work, I was like in graduate school, of course, and I was so fucking depressed. I had just moved away from all my friends and family and was really like doubting all these relationships, whether they were going to remain, and I felt like an awful artist at the time. I felt like a mediocre ass nigga. That's why I made it the piece. I mean, made it the work. And I was also in a place where there was like, Albuquerque's 3% Black. So I didn't feel the homeness that I felt being in Beaumont, Texas, which is like 50% Black. And so that's when I started making all these pieces that were so candidly raw. And I remember going into studio visits, we'd have critique, and I would just cry. And I laugh about it now, but I would have a critique with like a one-on-one critique or a group critique with my comrades, with the other photo majors, and I would cry because it was what I was feeling. It was so real, and I don't know. I didn't know how to get through it any other way. And I don't know. It's taken me a long time, I think, to understand what it really means to be depressed and to have these negative emotions and cope with them and experience with them. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I wish I could.
It's hard to articulate these things, I think. And then oftentimes that's why we gravitate towards making these things visually rather than talking about them, because sometimes that's clearer.
It's like the words out of my mouth. That's exactly why I started. I was like, I don't know. I would go to counseling sessions and I would be like, I don't know what you want me to do here. I mean, at first I was so new to it. I was like, I have no idea how to open up to people. I don't know what you want me to tell you. How am I supposed to tell you anything if I can even tell my best friends some of the things that are going on in my head? Yeah. And so it was like spilling out into art making.
So there's so much more that I want to talk about, but we don't have unlimited time. So
I know.
Before we get to the break, there's just one what I wanted to end this segment on was, I feel like in both of these series that there is this tension between the extremely personal and then the like sort of larger context, right? That whether you're talking about racism or whether you're talking about depression, that these things are highly, highly personal because those are things that happen to a person, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And all of our experiences with racism or with depression or any other like othering, things like that, these are highly personal to us because they happen to us. Mm-hmm. At the same time, this sort of shapes, the sort of outlines of those experiences are going to be really familiar to anyone else who's experienced them.
Exactly.
Like I'm not Black, so I haven't experienced anti-Black racism that was directed at me, but the contours of the racism that I have experienced are very similar to what you're depicting in these images. Similarly, my depression that I've been through is not going to be completely congruent to the experiences that you've had, but they're familiar enough that I can recognize them. And this sort of like, I don't know if it's like a juxtaposition or like a tension between these things being personal And the word that comes to mind, right, is universal, which I think is a little bit problematic because I'm not sure there is such a thing as a universal. But I think that that sense of rhyming, of familiarity, like it approaches something universal, you know?
Yes.
And so the way that there's that tension between the personal and the universal feels important to me about both of these series. And I wondered if you had anything to say about that.
Well, I can't help but be flattered. I mean, because I say that because like all the things you just said are really in line with how I feel about making this work. You know, especially like a mediocre ass nigga. It's a very personal body of work, and I recognize the fact that at the very origin of most, if not all of those pieces, was me trying to get through feelings and thoughts, my own personal feelings that no one else can personally feel. That being said, other people have personal feelings, you know, and they are also related to things that are similar potentially. Depression and anxiety is not just related to me. It's something that other people have. Black racism is something that other people have. Racism in general are things that other people experience, you know, so my admiration for those pieces is really because since I'm trying to just get this shit out of my damn head and deal with it, the fact that other people can pull from it, and feel from it, and it makes them think in a different way, or kind of like if they can internalize something that's maybe introspective or positive, that means a lot to me. And I would really aspire it for, while I understand it cannot be universal, like you said, I also understand that it's a hard term to really define, but you know, there's a oneness in humankind at the very least. I mean, we all have hearts that beat for a reason. There's something about us that's connected. So the idea that my work can relate to other people, regardless of their direct experience, that's something that I really aspire to do. Yeah, I feel like that's something I get out of a lot of artworks. I love artworks that make me think about how my life can somehow relate to the artist or maybe society. You know, I like art that makes me think, especially when it's relating to people. That's just something I can't seem to shake. So, you know, it makes me feel good. It's funny because a lot of my friends know this. People are so terrifying to me. I get really anxious in a lot of social situations. I don't know if you knew this at Medium, but girl, I was running back and forth to my hotel room because I was so anxious. I love it sometimes, but sometimes I just it's just overwhelming. But I also love people. I mean, the relationships are so important to me. They're so important to me. So I have this weird push and pull between how much I want to be alone sometimes and how much I really want to connect with other people. I don't know. I keep saying I don't know at the end.
It's deeply relatable to me. I'll just tell you what. And I really agree that, you know, a lot of times I think there's such power in art to be able to, and the phrase "bring people together" I feel like is such a loaded thing, especially in this political world that we're living in. But it feels cheesy, but I do feel like there is something about art that can bring people together. You know, that can bridge gaps. I mean, it feels really cheesy to phrase it that way, you know. But it like being able to recognize pieces of my own experience in someone else's art, or the other way around, when other people are able to see pieces of themselves in my art, you know, I mean, it's one of the most profound experiences that I get to have, and I always really appreciate it.
That's absolutely. I mean, I'm on the same page. I feel like you're cool.
Okay. Well, thank you. Why don't we take a quick little break and then we'll come back and do the second segment.
Cool. Awesome. Sounds good.
So for the second segment, I always invite the guest to bring a topic of their own, which could be whatever you'd like to talk about, whatever happens to be on your mind. So what would you like to talk about today?
So I don't even know how to describe this as far as a specific word, but let's talk about specifically something happy. So let's talk about things that inspire us that are like artistic, or things that inspire our art that are not really within the realm of what we see as visual art. I'm thinking specifically like I am very inspired by video games. I am very, very inspired by music as well. Also just like weird things like design, even though that is visual art. So yeah, just things within that realm if you're okay with that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think that, this sort of cross-pollination that happens between different disciplines is hugely important, certainly for myself. Like for me, I am both a writer and a photographer. So, and one tends to inform the other, like when I might, read poetry or something, or I have a new series that I'm starting to work on that was very largely inspired by a book of essays that I read. But I think like the sort of pop culture stuff, whether that's like TV or video games or something, like it can be very fruitful. I mean, not only for the sort of visual inspiration or the like thematic inspiration, but just like the fact that you're spending time on something that you enjoy, that sort of joy that it can spark can be such a like powerful thing. So where do you want to start with this?
Oh man. It's funny because I didn't want to start with people, artists, because that was like not the point. But I instantly started thinking of artists. So girl, I want to start with my fucking favorite video game.
Okay.
And I don't even know why we're going to start with it. We're going to start here.
Okay.
My favorite video game is Smash Brothers.
Okay.
And it is not, well, no, it's an artsy game kind of, but it's not a game where you like roam a world. It's not a game where you create a character. While I do love those games, honey, I love Pokemon and I love like world building. I love Elden Ring, but my favorite game is Smash Brothers, and it's just have you played Smash Brothers?
I have, but I suck at it.
We got to play it.
It's something about, I grew up on fighting games. I'm older than you are. So, but like I grew up on like Street Fighter 2,
Hey.
But there's something about the controls for Smash and like all of the iterations of Smash that have just like never ever clicked for me. And I don't know why.
Oh, that makes total sense. I mean, like I started my fighting games with Smash, and then, well, for the most part, I think I actually started with like Dragon Ball Budokai and like when I was in elementary school. But anyway, no, it's a GameCube controller, or it was like the Nintendo 64 controller. Those were made for like people with 4 hands. I just don't, but no, it's definitely a quirky controller. But I remember playing that game. Oh, this is not good. I remember like playing that game and I got so obsessed with it. And I don't know what it was. It's so different than art. It is not like when I make art, I tend to be pretty contemplative, but this game is a fighting game. It's all about like, can I beat you before you can beat me? I don't know why. I am so, I don't know why, because I don't know. Okay, hold up. It's just such a funny thing to me to bring up because I've never talked about Smash Brothers on a podcast before. It is something that is super inspiring to me. As it's just literally the fact that I can like really get into the research of like frame data on these video games and these characters is just as important to me as doing research. Not just as important because girl, the other one pays money, but, let's be real. We live in capitalism. Researching artists is going to help me out a little bit more, but there's such a relationship to me that is like doing work to make art and doing work to get better at this fighting game that I go to these random, I haven't been in a long time, these random tournaments with and get my ass beat. Like, I don't know why I have such an admiration specifically for that game. But video games in general, I could talk about how they inspired my practice forever. I mean, visual aesthetics and just like diving into like a world that isn't real is relational to the art making process for me. The Smash Brothers girl, I could play it till the end of time. I don't know why.
It's interesting, I think in general that the sort of art world, especially the sort of the critical art world hasn't fully caught up to how pop culture operates in general, but in particular with video games. Like I remember, this was a while ago now, but there was a whole like kerfuffle. This was probably like around 2002 or 2003, where like Roger Ebert made some like blog post about how like video games were never going to be art. And,
oh gosh.
But that's very typical of that sort of old guard mentality to criticism in art, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that there's, just as a site for art or artistic inspiration, the fact that you have agency as a player is really interesting. But I think, a lot of when I hear people talking about video games and as art or as artistically inspiring, what I hear is people talking about narrative games, right? Like, so, games like RPGs or whatever that have a story, or games that even if they're not strictly narrative, the art style or the way that you're interacting with it is sort of novel. But I think that there's something about games, right? Where like, cause like if you're playing, I don't know, like Final Fantasy 15 or something, you're not really like winning, right? You're just sort of completing it,
you're
right?
completing it. Yeah. You're going through the story, right?
Whereas like a game like Smash, or like if you're doing a racing game or something, like you're winning, right? It's a game.
Yeah, hopefully.
But you're trying to, right?
Yeah.
But the thing that I think about with those kinds of games is like that the experience of playing them is so immediate,
Yes.
And it's so like, it's almost like when you get into a flow in a fighting game or something like that, right? It's like, it's almost meditative, because you have to be super in the moment. You can't be like in your head about it, right?
Exactly.
And
oh my gosh,
I think that, whether or not that directly inspires anything, this the same way that meditating can bring about certain insights and epiphanies, that I think that the presentness you have to have of getting out of your head when you're playing a game like that can be generative in sort of an oblique way.
Mike, you're blowing my mind. You have no idea. Like, let me just, because I think you're so right. But, process of art making to me is it's not immediate. It's a lot of trial and error and figuring things out. And I guess I'm just like baffled. I'm so sorry to cut you off, by the way. I'm just baffled because, people would be like, so like, Andre, what are you doing? Like a friend will ask me, I'm like, okay, I'm doing this for my art. I'm doing this for my art. Have you played any video games recently? I want to play this. I haven't even opened Final Fantasy 15 yet. I haven't even opened it. I have like tons of games that I want to play, but I don't pick them up because I don't have the time, quote unquote, to get invested in these stories. I need something that is immediate. That's why I play Smash, because I'm like, I need a break from all this life and all this difficulty. I'll just play Smash for 30 minutes. Mm-hmm. And so I guess I was like, oh my God, you are like speaking me into existence without me even. Like, it's just, I was like, oh my God, maybe this like admiration for this video game, even though I put a lot of time into it, is that, it's so different. I need something immediate. I also must say, I do not like darkroom photography because I do not like to wait for the print. So all these things are overlapping in a weird way.
I feel like the process of art making, obviously it's different for everybody, but it involves, for most people, some like combination of intuition and analysis. Mm-hmm. And so like for a person like me, who I'm pretty sure I'm somewhere on the autism spectrum, and just in general, like me being me, I tend to think of myself as a person who is not very intuitive, that like I have to think everything through. Right. That like, and certainly when I'm assembling images into a photo series, it's very purposeful and like, it's very conscious. Every thought that I'm having, I'm thinking it through consciously. Right. Mm-hmm. But still there has to be some point where something just like happens, right? Like it just kind of like has to occur to me, and it can't be while I'm trying to make something happen, right? So like my photographic process is like typically I'm going out in the world and just like opening myself up and seeing what I see, right? Because my photographic practice my creative practice in general, whether it's photography or writing or whatever, is very much about, I want you to, because I felt misunderstood for my whole life. So I want you to be able to be in my shoes for a minute. I want you to see what I saw or feel what I felt. And whether or not I'm successful at that is some, whatever, but that's what I'm trying to do. And so in the moment of making an image, it's very instinctive, but then like doing something with it has to be purposeful, right? But then because I'm not shooting to an idea, right? The moment of quote unquote inspiration happens when I have a realization that I've been shooting to a theme unconsciously, right? And that realization doesn't happen because I'm looking at my images and going like, I wonder what the connective tissue is over the past 6 months. It just sort of like comes out of nowhere, right? And it usually has to happen when I'm not paying attention to it and not expecting it. And so it's that being present, whether it's because I'm going on walks or because I'm like reading reading poetry or watching a movie or playing a game, right? It's like the part of my brain that is sort of like crunching on things behind the scenes, right? My conscious mind has to be taken up with by paying attention to something else. Does that sort of make sense? Yeah, it does make sense. It's just, I feel like I work in such a different way. So it's interesting to me because like for like BLACK SNAFU, right? Like I was like, okay, Andre, what do you want to do? And I thought about it and then I had an idea and I was like, okay. And then I was like sketching up idea. I like, it wasn't a response to what I saw or it wasn't a response to my innate aspirations or what I found interesting. It was like, okay, let's do it. And I feel like with A Mediocre Ass Nigga, I first started making the work just because I needed to cope, but it quickly became a body of work that I was like, okay, like I'm going to start planning some things out because sometimes I feel like this and sometimes I feel like this. How do I visualize these through my means? Like, how can I make that come across? So it's just interesting because I feel like mine is very different, mine is very different in response to Smash Brothers, where, I am that nerd, honestly, who gets on the forums and labs and talks to people. I am that bitch. Me, my Bayonetta, she is not that bad, I swear. But, when I'm playing a match, I'm doing these combos on another person in response to the way that they play. It has to be immediate at like a competitive level, right? Not to say, please, y'all not gonna find me anyway. Because if y'all look me up, y'all not gonna find me because I don't have any like wonderful good videos on the internet of me playing Smash. It's immediate. It is a reaction to this play. I'm also a very aggressive and aggro player. But anyway, I don't know. It's just funny. I feel like the way that is more reactionary to me, that is more like a response of something that feels intuitive, is more when I'm playing Smash. And I mean, I say that my process is intuitive, but something that I guess is like just really in the moment, it's just when I'm in the match. Because even when I'm intuitive making art, I'm at least thinking about how I want my feelings to be portrayed. Yeah. But do you ever have, I mean, I feel like most artists and writers they'll have a point in any project where they're stuck, right? And they're like, I don't know what's supposed to happen next. And the process of getting unstuck, like you can have things that you do, like I know like Alexander Chee, the writer Alexander Chee, has all of these things that he says, like, when you're feeling a block on something, it's because of this. And so you need to go do this kind of thing. You can have tools, but like, I feel like the moment of getting unstuck, there is something that is a little bit magical about it, that it just kind of happens, Yeah. And I feel like that there is something about the like the not paying attention to it, the not like trying to force it, like moving your brain into a different space helps with that kind of thing. But do you find that to be true? I mean, I don't know.
I don't know, honestly, because I find it to be very helpful. I find it to allow me to literally just fucking rest.
Yeah.
But I don't know if it allows me in some way to move past it, because I feel like allowing me to rest helps me think clearer. But when I'm thinking about the times when I've gotten unstuck, it's been so random. I remember one time I got unstuck was because of talking to my teacher. I remember I was like making work for a mediocre ass nigga still. And I had my teacher, Patrick Manning. I love him. He was my teacher in grad school. Anyway, he came into my studio and he was like, so, yo, what's up? And I was like, I suck. Like, that was pretty much the conversation. I was like, I'm not good at this. And he was very sweet, but he also was very like analytical. He was like, okay, how many pieces have you made in this past month? And I was like 10. And that feels like a lot. And he was like, okay, how many do you think are good? And I said, like 1. And he said, 1 out of every 10 that you're making in a month? That sounds pretty good to me. And then I thought about it, and I was like, wow, if someone told me that, I would probably say the same thing. I guess it is pretty good. And so like that helped me get past the hurdle of like just like feeling. The stuckness to me was so much of a feeling. I was making these things and just scrapping them because I thought they weren't good. And I guess that confirmation and just putting it into terms like that is what helped me get unstuck. But there's also been times when I felt like I was unstuck. Like after graduate school, like I made one piece and I was like, ooh, this one's kind of okay. I'm like, okay, we're back into it. Made another piece. Okay. But it's whatever. And then I like got stuck again. So, I don't know.
I think that the thing that you said about needing to rest is such a true thing, that like you can't really like underestimate how important it is to not be living in the work 24/7, that you have to take breaks, and that whether it's, sleeping or, cooking or playing a video game or going and reading a book or going for a walk or hanging out with your friends or whatever it is, like you have to, you can't be like staying in that space of art making all the time,
I completely agree. And I have a question for you in response to that, because I think I feel the same way, but I also feel it's so hard to find times to take breaks when you make personal work, when your work is about kind of like your existence. Well, it's like, bitch, I'm always existing. So it's hard. It's like, and I get it though. There's, taking rest and taking Smash Brothers, but there's definitely been plenty of times where I'm like, how can I incorporate Smash Brothers into my practice, my art practice, So it's like, does it feel hard to you to take those breaks when you make specifically personal work that's about your experience? Reverse podcast moment.
For me, I would say I am just such a procrastinator. And at least photographically, the process of image making is very automatic for me. So I'm constantly taking pictures. Like I can't not take pictures because that is just sort of like, it's just what I'm doing. Even when I don't have a camera on me, I'm still like mentally taking pictures, I remember, back when I was still married, I was on a trip with my wife at the time, and I was the one driving, so I'm like, I can't like take pictures while I'm driving, but we were just on the highway and I was like, oh, look at that right there, look at how the like shadow on that hill is like coming, that would be such a great picture. And she just looked at me and said, you can't not do that, huh? so but I don't think of the image making as the site of art making for me, because I feel like there has to be an intentionality behind it. Like if you're going to call it art, there has to be something more than just like, I saw something and grabbed it,
Yeah.
And so for me, the process of turning it from snapshots into art is really in the series, right? It's like, I have to assemble the images so that there's a through line and that there's something that's being communicated.
I see.
And I hate doing that. And like, I sort of like avoid it until I can't avoid it anymore. And then and then it just kind of happens, and then I'll be like head down for like 2 months and being like, okay, I'm doing this. But as a consequence of that, there can be like really big gaps. Like, I haven't made a new body of work in probably 5 years, but I've been making images that whole time. And I just now had a sort of breakthrough where I'm like, oh, this is what I need to do next. And
oh my God. Well, congratulations on the breakthrough.
We'll see if it goes anywhere. So, but yeah.
Well, I still struggle with this. A lot of the times, even though I have my degrees in photography feels like the beginning of the process for me. I started art with drawing, like redrawing Dragon Ball Z characters, specifically like anime characters. And I would just draw all the time. And then in high school, I started photography and I got really into Photoshop. And so for me, I've always been into like using my hand in some way that is more than the shutter. And so sometimes it's super difficult for me to accept a photograph or a piece of art as a photograph, whether there's intentionality behind it or not, or a meaning for it to connect to art. Sometimes I'm like, but I didn't do nothing to it. And that's not the case. I don't know. It's just interesting because I guess we as artists have all of the right and means to determine what is art within our own practice. It's just so malleable sometimes. It's so fucking weird.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and everybody approaches these things differently, and there's not really like a wrong way to do it as long as you're not hurting anybody. But yeah, I mean, I think it's really fascinating to think about too. And I just love, I mean, just in general, I love hearing what other people are interested in, Speaking of which, we are pretty close to time at this point. We're actually a little over time. So,
my bad.
So I know I just want to make sure that I'm not taking up too much of your time.
Oh, yeah. You're good.
The last question that I always end with is if there is a piece of art or literature or creativity in some form that you've experienced recently that meant something to you.
Yes. And I'm going to look back on this in 3 years and be like, what the fuck was I thinking? But it's pertinent, I think, for me for plenty of reasons. Beyonce's Renaissance album has stuck with me. It is such a wonderful album. It's house music. And it's like, this, I love everything about it. It's Beyonce in a way that I have never seen her before. It's a lot of dance. It's a lot of things that are relative to queer culture, specifically queer house, queer music, and ballroom culture that came specifically out of queer, Black, and brown people. And so while I love this album and recognize it for its relationship to that, part of me can't help but be like, are you appropriating this with the right intentions? And who is getting the credits to this? And I know that there are like queer people like Sid from the internet, and Mike Q from very, very popular producer in the ballroom scene, that have produced some of the songs on the album, which is like, oh yes, mama, yes, please. Like, we need more queer people in this. But I'm wondering, this album that I love so much because Beyonce is that bitch with this music, and is also connected to queerness. I just want it to be, I'm like, is this done with all the right intentions? Because we know Beyonce got money, and we know what money can do. So I'm just like, I love this album, but I think it works because we talked about appropriation, and that's something that I question with the album.
What that reminds me of is, sort of the conversations that were happening around Madonna's music like 20, 30 years ago. Exactly.
It's literally that.
Yeah.
One of my friends said that Beyonce feels like the new Madonna. And I'm like, yeah, a little bit.
And because Madonna was such a queer icon, but also like not queer or
literally not queer.
Yeah. So it's an interesting thing that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for talking with me. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was such a wonderful opportunity. It's nice. I hope we can talk in the future.
Okay, as I mentioned at the top of the episode, André has exhibitions coming up at Kanski in Reykjavik and at the Houston Center for Photography, so be on the lookout for those. I've also included a link to André's website in the show notes, so do check that out. And that is our show. Editing and mixing on this episode is by me, the music is by Poddington Bear, and transcription help is by Shea Aguinaldo. I'd love to hear your thoughts on today's conversation, so hit me up on Twitter and Instagram at ChannelOpenPod, and you can find all of the show's contact information, transcripts, and show notes on our website at keepthechannelopen.com. Keep the Channel Open will be back next month with a new conversation, so do be sure to come back for that. And until then, remember, keep the channel open.